Good morning, everyone. I think we're going to try to get started. I'd ask you all to find seats if you can. I'm hoping that we can all fit in here. If not, we do have an overflow room, but we'd obviously rather all be together. So my name is David Harris. I'm the managing director at the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice here at Harvard Law School. It's all downhill from there. So on behalf of Dean Minow at the law school, the Institute, and all of us, I welcome you. We're pleased to be joined this morning in hosting this event by the Mel King Institute, Action for Regional Equity, and of course, MAPC. It's our pleasure in doing this stems in no small part from the fact that 2.5 years ago, we hosted another event for the release of the predecessor report to today's, The State of Equity. And I was pleased to be able to be part of the advisory group that worked on that project, and I'm pleased to be able to be here again with you today. I think the turnout today tells us how important and equity is to us in this region, and what kind of commitment we have to it. And it's really a tribute to those of you who have made the time to come here, and I appreciate it. Today, MAPC releases a draft document that details a continuing and at times increasing degree of inequity in our region. It identifies drivers of those inequities and proposes an action agenda that can begin to reverse those inequities. As always, the document is detailed and concise, and I encourage you, it's a trademark, right? I encourage you to, if there are copies, to obtain a copy, but also it's available online. I'm sure Mark will talk a little bit more about it. So, although we at the Institute don't articulate our mission in terms of regional equity, it's clear that we share a mission with you. And I'm reminded of the words of Charles Hamilton Houston, for whom our Institute is founded, who, at the point at which it seemed that he would prevail on dismantling school segregation, he was fairly confident that he had laid the groundwork, really warned and advised that we really had to continue and that all our struggles had to tie in together. And I think that's in some sense an aspect of regional equity that we really have to protect and maintain, and recognize that we can't isolate factors, and we have to kind of struggle to make sure that inequity of any kind is addressed before we think of having it made any achievements. We're very fortunate today to have a group of people who will speak to you and make this report and its findings come to life and help us think through what we can do in the future. I used to be part of the equity movement, and at the Institute, I haven't done much work on this, and so the ability to host an event like this and be here with you is a bit of renewal for me. And I have to close by saying that no event that we do here at the Institute takes place or succeeds without the work and effort of two of our most important members, Kelly Garvin and Ernest Owens. Thank you. Neither of them is with us today, but all of their work went into making this happen, and they deserve the time off. So all thanks and praise to them. So we have a very full agenda today, and I want us to proceed immediately, and I will introduce at this point Mark Drayson, Executive Director of MAPC, who can tell us a little bit about that detailed and concise report. Mark?
Thank you, David. Detailed, yes. Concise, no. So, and neither will my remarks be concise. So, settle in. Amy's already got the 5-minute sign up, so the hook is not far away. Welcome. It's a pleasure to see a full room on this topic and this beautiful New England day. We're very glad and honored to be hosted by the Institute and by our good friend David Harris, who I feel still and always works on equity issues. I don't know how he describes his job now, but it seems to me that he does. And also to be sharing this event with Action for Regional Equity, which has done so much to bring together nonprofit and other organizations where equity may be a part of their work, but then to really sort of harness them together to work on equity as a team. And also the Mel King Institute, which does such a wonderful job at training and preparing and advancing the workers in the community development field, which is part of my background as well. We are so honored to have Marvin representing Action, Marvin Martin, right here, right, where is, he was at my table, but I don't know where he went. There he is, right next to my table. And then also Sharonda Almeida from the Mel King Institute. Sharonda, where are you? Right over there, who's also the secretary of MAPC. Our organizations working together and with so many other allies and partners are here for a very particular reason today. And I want to say just a little bit about what that reason is to put it in context of our ongoing activities. In 2008, MAPC concluded a 5-year effort to develop our regional plan, which is one of our statutory obligations. And that is called Metro Future, Making a Greater Boston Region. And the Metro Future Plan is broad and diverse and has a wide range of objectives. It covers issues related to land use, issues related to the economy, issues related to collaboration among municipalities. If anything, it is so broad that it's sometimes hard to get a handle on it. One of the ways in which we tried to get a handle on it was to isolate 3 or 4 key factors that we felt should go throughout the plan, should be common core issues that weren't relegated to one chapter or one goal, but were spread across the planning process. And equity, developing a more equitable region, was one of those. We recognized the history that exists in the greater Boston region, which has struggled so much, so long, so hard, over so many generations with issues of inequality within the city of Boston, within the metropolitan region, across issues of race, ethnicity, gender, and a wide variety of other areas. And we realized that that needed to be a core value and core concern for the Metro Future Plan. And so if you go through the Metro Future Plan, it's 65 goals, and under those goals, hundreds of objectives. I told you, not concise. Then you will find that about 25 of those goals are actually related, directly or indirectly, to issues of equity. And then when we move to establish our implementation strategies for Metro Future, similarly, you can find sprinkled throughout those implementation strategies recommendations to try and make this a more equitable region in individual neighborhoods, across different groups, and also among all of the municipalities of the Metro Boston region. Whether those implementation strategies were related to housing, or jobs, or public safety, or public health, you can find those strategies explained from the perspective of how they will increase equity in the region. And we not only put them in, by putting them not only in the goals, but putting them as a focus in the implementation strategies, we committed ourselves as an agency. And I'd like to think without too much arrogance that it means the region committed itself to focusing on actual action steps to deal with the issue of equity. But because the plan was broad and in many cases fairly general, we knew that the goals and the strategies in the plan were not going to be sufficient. They weren't sufficiently detailed to set up an action agenda of things that we could actually do on a day-to-day basis in our work. And so to accomplish that, we took 2 additional steps. The first step was to do what we call an indicators report. And indicators reports were conceived as part of the Metro Future program, that it's not enough to simply have goals and strategies, but we need to measure progress over time. And if you're going to measure progress over time, you need to establish a baseline to start. And so the very first regional indicators report that we did subsequent to Metro Future was focused explicitly on equity. Now, since then, we've begun to work on, prosperity indicators, sustainable transportation indicators, a wide variety of others. But we felt it sent a message to start with a regional indicators report on equity. And we released that here at this august institution, I think right next door, 2 years ago in December of 2011, as our State of Equity in Metro Boston report. And the principal authors of that report were, first of all, yes, come back into the room, Jesse Grogan, who's here, and then also Mariana Arcaya, who is now at the Harvard School of Public Health, but was at that point at MAPC. This was a groundbreaking analysis of inequality in our region, based across a wide variety of indicators. It took an interesting look at people because instead of just discussing issues of inequity by topic area, as we're so used to, these are the inequities in health, these are the inequities in housing, these are the inequities in income, we chose to look at people as they age, from birth to death. How do you face challenges of inequality in each stage of your life? How do they add up? How do they multiply and reinforce one another? And so we didn't just come up with an obvious statement, yes, there's inequality in the region. I think we tried to demonstrate where that inequality comes from and how it operates. And when we released the report, we knew that we needed a detailed policy agenda for how we were going to tackle the problems isolated in that report, so that the next time we do our measurements, we can show progress in as many areas as possible. That is the report that we are releasing today. The policy agenda, the action plan for redressing issues of equity in the Metro Boston region. Now, this is a very tough challenge. It's not only hard because, of course, issues of inequality are ingrained in our society, in our region, and they're difficult to address. It's difficult to approach the issue because it is so big and so all-encompassing and so ingrained in our society and in our history as a region and as a nation, that every action agenda you put forward could fall into one of two difficult categories. It could appear to be so tiny and small and modest that it couldn't possibly really help achieve the goal of greater equity. Or it could look so vast and big and difficult that it will take you a decade to make any progress. And I think one of the reasons that it took us 2.5 years from the release of the indicators report to the development and really agreement on the policy agenda is because of that challenge, that, equity can be the kind of issue or a class of issues that can make it very difficult for you to really say, okay, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to deal with this, because it either looks inadequate to the task or it looks as though it's going to take a long time and be really hard. But we feel at MAPC, and it's not just MAPC, it's all of our partners in our co-sponsor group, our partners in the recently completed Sustainable Communities program, and I know all of you in this room are devoted to proceeding anyway. If you wake up one day and you can take a small step and it's in the right direction, let's do that. If you can focus on a big campaign and a big plan that isn't going to bear fruit overnight, but which will really move the needle on issues of inequality, let's do that. Let's not be afraid to put that action agenda forward and say we must devote time, energy, money, and political capital to being sure that when we measure a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, we've gone in the right direction, even if we haven't gotten all the way there. There are action agenda items in this report that are going to be probably led by MAPC because they're things that are within our niche and we're already working on them. But there are also going to be plenty of action items in this report that are led by other organizations in this room. And we will sign on, we will help, we will write a letter, we will make an occasional call to a legislator, we will come to a rally or a meeting or an event, but we won't be in charge. There's also a third class of objectives in this report for which the leaders have not yet been identified. That's okay today. It's not really going to be okay a year from now, because we are all going to have to work to say, okay, this was dedicated as an important item. It's not clear who's taken it on yet. Let's find someone to take it on. And that's going to be part of the job as well, because there is no organization and no group of people that can lead this entire agenda. The agenda itself has to come from a partnership. I, as some people in this room know, most people in this room probably know, I've lived in the city of Boston every day of my life. I was born in Boston, and when I was 14, I moved 1.5 miles away, but I was still in Boston. That was the big move of my life, 1.5 miles. And I've stayed in that neighborhood in Roslindale ever since. And I spend a lot of time thinking about the history of the city. And it means a lot to me, and it's informative to the actions that I would like us to take at MAPC. And of course, one could not help but see all the attention over the course of the past several months to the 40th anniversary of Judge Garrity's busing decision. And I listened to a lot of that coverage in the radio, and I watched on television, I read it in the papers. Sometimes I'm in my car alone, and I'll listen to the coverage on the radio, and I'll start yelling, and people will look at me from the next car and wonder what I'm so upset about. And there was a lot of good, insightful coverage of this important historical event, but there was a lot missing too. I took umbrage at the fact that, the overall sense seemed to be, well, yep, there were problems, the schools were segregated, and then this judge didn't know anything, he ordered busing, and of course it didn't work, and now here we are. Because I know that it's not that simple. There is no moral equivalency in that fight, actually, between the two groups, the two sides. And I saw, although there were failures and difficulties and inadequacies, tremendous accomplishments and change in the right direction as a result of busing and as a result of the attempt to integrate the schools in the city of Boston. But to me, the greatest difficulty was that when you do a retrospective, it's not just that you should focus on that retrospective. It's that you should also say, okay, what are we doing going forward? This remains a segregated region. Our children are more segregated than adults in this region. That was one of the powerful things that we saw in the State of Equity report. And we need to have an agenda going forward. Whatever happened in the past, however people feel about that anniversary or any of the other anniversaries that we could mark, the real question is, what did we learn there and how are we going to move forward? And to me, this action agenda is all about moving forward. It's saying, okay, we've made some progress. We have a way to go. What are we going to do so that in the future we're going to be better off, all of us? A stronger region because of greater equity, not only for individual families and households, but also for the region as a whole. I want to close by just making a few remarks on one particular topic issue, and we're going to have a number of speakers who focus on their issues. I have an issue that I want to raise today as well and point out as being included in the report, which is very important to me because I'm a housing planner. That's the work that I've done historically and part of the lens that I bring to MAPC. And to me, the issue of fair housing is a critical agenda item in our action agenda. One of the reasons it is so critical is because of the remaining pattern of residential segregation in this region, where not every neighborhood in Boston is integrated, and not every community, very few communities in the greater Boston region are integrated, and much of that is because of where housing is built, what kind of housing gets built, patterns of racial steering, and ongoing concerns about fair housing. In our Sustainable Communities program, we did 3 big documents, big reports on the fair housing issue, the Fair Housing and Equity Assessment. I know Henry Corman. Henry, where are you? Was one of the principal authors of that document, which can now be found on our website, recently completed. The second was, as I think some of you know, HUD is in the process of issuing a new rule. We hope it's going to come out soon that will encourage communities, require communities to pay more attention to the actions they take that are or are not affirmatively furthering fair housing. And when that rule comes out, we need to be ready to do those analyses and also affect policy in the advantage of that rule. So we were asked by HUD with some of our sustainable communities money to do an analysis under the new rule, even though the new rule's not out yet. Now, they asked us to do it for 101 cities and towns in our region, and we couldn't do that. But we did do it for the South Shore Home Consortium, and Jen Erickson on our staff, Jen, where are you? In the back was the principal author of that report. That's also available on our website. I believe that's going to be a national model for this work. And then lastly, Jen was also involved, Barbara Chandler was involved from a board perspective in the development of a fair housing toolkit, was the third item that we did. Well, now that those three items are done, the analysis is done, the recommendations are included, the tools are available for training. The one thing we're waiting for is the release of the HUD rule, which hopefully will happen soon. We need to go forward and start doing this fair housing work, which is why if you look in the policy agenda, roughly between pages 25 and 33, because I don't have time, I've already been given the time sign, so I can't actually open the report and start reading about all these interesting recommendations. But in those 8 pages, you will find about a half a dozen or 8 recommendations that are very specifically related to issues of doing fair housing audits, encouraging more fair housing testing, building more affordable housing and multifamily housing in suburban communities and in parts of the city of Boston where not enough exists, and also assisting vulnerable populations in homes to be able to cope with some of the difficulties of climate change, which is an interesting nexus and connection there that you might not normally expect. So we have set that agenda up for ourselves, and my hope is, and I am committing MAPC as an organization and our resources as well, to try and make sure that we will be actively engaged in that fair housing agenda, because it is such a critical part of equity in the region on the one hand, and the overall housing agenda for the region on the other. I will close by thanking a few members of my staff, Jesse Grogan again, and also Eric Hove. I do not know if Eric is here today. Eric is right there by the door as well. We're the 2 principal authors of the policy agenda. I want to also thank Amy Cotter, our Director of Regional Plan Implementation, for overseeing and spearheading this work, and also assisting with the framing for today's event. And if I could ask members of the MAPC Executive Committee and members of the MAPC staff just to rise for a moment so I can acknowledge you for the work that you do on advancing equity in the greater Boston region. Not every regional planning agency in America is focused on equity. More are focusing on equity now than 5 or 10 years ago. I like to think we're in the vanguard of that. It can be tough work, as we all know, but it is important work. And we need national leaders who help us in this endeavor as well, who pick us up when we're down, who provide us with good examples from the rest of the country, and who speak about the importance nationally. And one of those is certainly our keynote speaker today, Angela Glover-Blackwell. And I just want to say, before leaving the podium, how pleased we are to have her with us here today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mark. I want to lend you a line to use that some of you have heard me use before. It's from a labor leader, a candidate for office who took the podium and boldly announced, "Our last speaker spoke to you in vague generalities. I, however, am going to speak to you at random." Feel free to use it, Mark. Which is not to say that he was not, that he was. Mark was, in fact, as we heard, fairly concise, pages 25 to 33. How much more concise can we be? But thank you, Mark, and I also do want to acknowledge that Mark's calling out fair housing as the example that he wanted to use and delve into is extremely important, and I think it's an important message for all of us to absorb and understand that no matter what we think about how much progress we've made, and as we mark the 40th anniversary of the desegregation of schools, ongoing residential segregation continues to haunt us, and we really do have to devote ourselves to addressing that. So it is now my pleasure, actually, to turn our attention. We have several practitioners who will talk to us a little bit about what they're doing and some action items that they might see going forward to increase equity in the region. I'm going to introduce them by name. Their bios are in your program. I'm not going to belabor that. No bio ever does justice to a person's full accomplishments, but you can get a little sense of them there. Each speaker will speak, and we will not have time immediately following for questions, but our speakers will be with us at lunch, and we encourage you to try to find them if you do have questions and engage them in conversation. First, we have Meredith Levy, Deputy Director of the Somerville Community Corporation. We have Kalila Barnett, Executive Director of Alternatives for Community and Environment. I always never say that out loud, the whole thing. Stephanie Ettinger DeCuba, Research and Policy Director of the Children's Health Work. And CJ Victor, Youth Organizer for the Center for Teen Empowerment. Having said that, Meredith, would you join us? Thank you.
Hi, nice to see everyone here today. I am coming from Somerville Community Corporation, and SCC is also a member of Action for Regional Equity, so we're really happy to help sponsor this event. So let me give you a quick rundown in the context in Somerville. My story today is about displacement and how do we prevent displacement. Somerville is going through tremendous changes right now. As you probably all know, the Green Line's coming to Somerville, and in the next 5 years, we're gonna see 6 new stops in Somerville. And in the same time period, we'll see over 6 million square feet of development for commercial, retail, housing, et cetera. Huge changes. It's becoming a really hot market. This, while exciting, is also something we need to watch because we know that people, especially low-income people, are at great risk of having to leave the community. And for us, it's really important that everybody gets to benefit from all of this investment and all of the amenities that are about to come to Somerville. So anecdotally, we already see the speculation happening. Small business owners are seeing rent increases of 50%. Even SCC saw a similar rent increase recently in Union Square. We also know from the Dimensions of Displacement study, which was completed by MAPC with SCC and the city of Somerville, that in transit areas along the Green Line, there are projections of rent increases of between 25 and 67%. So this is going to hit hard, and we need to watch carefully. SCC, a few years ago, decided to be very intentional about our intended impact and our mission, which is that we want to maintain Somerville's socioeconomic diversity. That is first and foremost the most important thing we can do, and minimizing displacement is our top mission right now. It was very important for us to say that a few years ago because right now we align all of our work towards that goal. So everything we do, whether it's asset building or affordable housing development or organizing, all has to move towards that goal of preventing and minimizing displacement. It's also important that not only do we align our work that way, but that we say that over and over again. Our members are at public hearings, they're writing op-eds, what have you. All of the leaders that work with us are saying the same thing. We want to make sure people do not get displaced from Somerville when all of this change happens. We all want to benefit. So that framework is hugely important and has been hugely helpful for us. So given that that's what we do and that 100%, 150% of our time is dedicated to that, how do we do that? So I'm going to talk about 5 strategies that we've used to try to minimize displacement as we move forward into the future. One is research. Mark mentioned all of the great research MAPC has done. We've been a beneficiary of that. We just, as I mentioned, produced the Dimensions of Displacement tool and research report. That gives us a lot of information, a baseline of data that we can watch, and indicators that we can track over time. It's important for us to really understand what's happening in the community, and the us, when I say us, I mean everybody in the community. So for us, we spend a lot of time breaking down the data through popular education, participatory workshops, so that as a community, we can understand what's going on, watch it, and set some real clear-cut goals. Also, a second strategy is community planning. That's really important for us. So we can help set our goals by understanding what people want and need. We led a community corridor planning process with some partners in the city along the Green Line, where we engaged over 1,000 people in this process, and we were able to set a foundation for our vision. So we created 11 principles, including affordable housing, preservation of local businesses, environmental justice, et cetera. But this has formed a platform that we can attach all of our action on. It's been very helpful. It's sort of like our constitution that we've been using for the last over 5 years. So community planning has been really important. And then there's the organizing. So we want to make sure that we take action. And organizing is the way we're going to see the vision, and all of the things that we've created through the vision, we need to turn it into specific, actionable accomplishments to get towards those goals. So we may have the research, we may have the vision, we may be talking from practitioner to practitioner, but it takes more than that. It takes a political will to make these changes. And the political will can be influenced by a large base of people all clamoring for the same thing. So some of the examples of our organizing work in the last couple of years have been, for example, a couple of years ago, we passed the Community Preservation Act, which brings $1.5 million to the city every year. Just this past year, we organized with our members to push for the increase of the affordable housing linkage fee from $3.91, it's now $5.15. All of that money will go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And that's a big deal because we have huge development happening in Assembly Square, like Partners is coming in right now. And that's gonna create millions of dollars to be dedicated for affordable housing. We are hard at work to influence inclusionary zoning. The city's undergoing a zoning reform right now, a huge overhaul. Our eyes are on the prize. We want to make sure our inclusionary zoning is reformed and revised. It's at 12.5% now. We'd like it to be higher. We want it to reach families. We want it to reach lower income families. Local hiring is another big thing we've been working on the last couple of years. As a result of a lot of organizing, we have 2 accomplishments this year. Just this March, we launched with the city a First Source program to connect local workers with local jobs. Huge accomplishments for us. It's right now we've got 100 people in the system and we're growing every day. The other thing that happened is we organized with MassDOT. We showed up at a lot of board meetings over the years. We worked closely with our delegation and our legislators to create a memorandum of understanding that was just signed 2 weeks ago. Really exciting. It's launching a whole new workforce development program that will explicitly connect, give priority to the local workforce in the communities that will benefit from the Green Line. And then the other thing we're working on right now is a community benefits agreement. There's a new master development process happening in Union Square. We want to make sure we're focusing on preventing the displacement, promoting an equity agenda, and creating the terms of an agreement that will help make sure that this new investment, this new development benefits the people we want it to benefit. So those are some examples of our organizing campaigns. The last thing that I will talk about is our acquisition strategy. We're an affordable housing developer. It's very important for us that we've got our finger on the pulse. It's not just random affordable housing development. How can we sharpen our strategy and how we do this? One of the things that we do is we are working on transit-oriented development. So right now we've got 2 big projects in the pipeline around the new stations coming into Somerville and another one in the horizon in the same area. So focusing our work in TOD areas is important. We also know that Somerville's housing stock is made up of a lot of 2 and 3 family buildings, and that's where we're going to see a lot of change in the next few years. So we're embarking on an effort to acquire a lot of those properties and then resell them as affordable. So these are the strategies. It's trial and error. It's very important for us that we know that we can't do any one of these strategies alone. They're working in concert with each other, and it's the leaders in our community that are pushing the agenda. It's not going to happen without those leaders. So that's, we have to keep naming the question, framing it, and just being vigilant. It's not going to happen in 1 year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It's going to take decades, and the last decade, the decade coming forward, to really see our agenda moving forward. But in the meantime, each of the goals that we realize gets us closer to the bigger goal. Thanks.
Hello. My name is Kalila Barnett, and I'm from ACE. And we are an environmental justice organization. So I came over here today with a few colleagues from Roxbury, from Dudley Square. In addition to being an environmental justice organization, ACE is also connected with some important coalitions. That's part of how we do our work. So one of which is Action for Regional Equity, and also the Right to the City Alliance. So the sort of framing for our work is that we believe that everyone has a right to a healthy and safe environment. And we work on ensuring those rights, in particular for low-income communities and communities of color in Massachusetts, because even today, that right is not ensured for everyone. And so I'm talking today just briefly about ensuring climate change resilience for all residents. And, you know, from an environmental justice perspective, climate change resilience is broader than this idea around recovery or preparedness, right? This idea that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And there's an environmental justice leader named Eddie Batista, who's from the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, who says, when we talk about resilience, we have to talk about bouncing forward and not just bouncing back. EJ communities and low-income communities of color, particularly in the inner core of Boston, where ACE is doing a lot of its organizing work, are facing two major threats to our livelihood, one of which is climate change impacts, and the other is the threats of gentrification and displacement. And so we have to understand that the same factors that make our communities vulnerable to displacement from gentrification are the same factors that make our communities least able to adapt to climate change, including concentrated poverty, high numbers of renters who are vulnerable to rent increases, both on the residential side and on the commercial side, high rates of foreclosure, unemployment, underemployment. So how do we bounce forward? What does that really mean? Those are the questions that ACE is asking itself. And so for us, part of what it means is that bouncing forward means that our communities get to thrive in place. Thriving in place means that our community's racial and ethnic makeup, identity, and culture can remain intact in the face of the changes ahead around the economy and also around the climate. And a few ways about how we go about that. So one is continuing to do the kind of work that's already a part of ACE's EJ agenda, working around issues of public transportation, working around issues of the intersection of land and food, of air and water and energy. But we do this from a perspective about a longer term vision, understanding that the conditions that we're facing are going to change, right? We have long-term plans, but we have to also understand within those plans that we're not going to have a stable economy. We're not going to have a stable climate. So we just can't pretend like things are going to go on as usual. How do we think about those things differently? But also begin to do some of the same basic things that we've already been doing. Public transportation is going to continue to be a vibrant part of an adapted Boston and adapted region. And so we need to continue to make sure that in communities of color, low-income communities, that there's an increase in public transportation services. If we're going to be able to reduce vehicle miles traveled, we have to really think about how do we expand service? How do we find the resources to be able to begin to do that? Thinking about expanding on programs around energy efficiency and energy independence. How can we have more community ownership of energy systems, that there's a level of redundancy so that when those disasters come, when the storm surges come, that folks are ready to continue to thrive and live. Two is that we also feel like there is a growing desire to really understand more, do more research into what are climate adaptation and mitigation strategies that are important for environmental justice communities and non-coastal communities. We need to begin to really think about how does life happen in those communities, have residents themselves be a part of the table and thinking about how do we plan for an adapted future. We know that there are many public health impacts as the climate changes that are going to continue to be exacerbated by extreme summer heat waves, which is actually has been the leading cause of weather-related deaths over the past decade. Degraded air quality, extreme rain events, storms and flooding. How do we address this disproportionate impact? And then finally, just to reiterate again some of the connections between what Meredith is saying, is we need to think about how do we maintain the social cohesion and social infrastructure for environmental justice communities. And for us, that's community organizing. Community organizing and leadership development that builds new political power within EJ communities. In order for our communities to adapt to the coming changes, we have to deepen, expand, and improve the community and social infrastructure that supports low-income youth and adults to participate in neighborhood civic life so that they can affect policy change. If these problems were easy to solve, they would have been done a long time ago. If we had the political will to do the things that we wanted to do, they would have been done a long time ago. And so it's not just about proceeding with business as usual. It's about organizing thousands of people in environmental justice communities across the region to really get together to call for these changes that are a part of the equity plan in all of the areas to ensure that we can govern and we can live in a really different way. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. It's going to be a little bit of a departure, I think, but very much related. My topic is disparities in health. In particular, I was asked to talk about access to food. Nutrition really is the foundation to health, and too many of our neighbors have inconsistent access to food, and particularly to access to healthy, affordable food, and perhaps even people in this room. And that is food insecurity. That's the term that's used nationally. It's something that the government, USDA, measures annually with 18 questions in a survey. And so we have national prevalence numbers. We know that 14.9% of our households in this country are food insecure. And we know that that's even higher among households with children. That's 20% of our households with children are food insecure, about a fifth of our households. There are two really big key risk groups. One of them is female-headed households with children. We have 35% of our families that are headed by a woman are food insecure, and it's even higher among households with very young children, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about in a moment. Food insecurity has a really insidious impact on health. If you stop and think about yourself for a moment, if you think about when you've skipped lunch because you were too busy or you missed breakfast, you can think about how you felt. You were irritable, you were tired, you couldn't focus, you weren't very productive at work. Well, think about what if you had to miss a whole day, or if that was your life, you missed a meal every day of your life, or you worried about food every day of your life. Am I going to have enough? Am I going to have dinner tonight? Am I going to be able to provide for my kids? Then you start to think about what that means for your mental health, for your mental state, as well as for your physical health. There's lots of research on food insecurity. I'm just going to focus on a small portion of it related to kids because that's what I've been asked to talk about today. But we know that food insecurity starts to affect us even before we're born. When pregnant women are food insecure, they are more likely to have babies that die, higher rates of infant mortality, higher rates of premature birth, low birth weight, and birth defects. So we're getting kids started off on the wrong foot right from the get-go. For young children, research tells us that food insecurity in early life affects brain development. So the kids are more likely to have developmental delays. They're more likely to have iron deficiency anemia, which affects cognitive development. And they're more likely to be in fair or poor health and to be hospitalized, which obviously is an indicator of how serious the condition is. For school-age kids, They're more likely to have headaches and stomach aches, be sick, be out of school, have poor academic performance, and have a hard time making friends relating to their peers. And then as kids grow older into adolescence, food insecure boys, adolescent boys, are more likely to have lower bone density and be more susceptible to bone breaks. And for older kids, getting more into the sort of 15 to 17-year-old range, you start to have kids who are food insecure that are thinking about suicide, suicidal ideation. They're very aggressive, they're angry, and again, having trouble relating to peers and doing well in school. So, and this is not, this is not necessarily kids that are missed a full day's meals. This is a meal here and there, or their families have had to cut back quality. It doesn't take much. Food insecurity is really a toxic stress, and it affects your brain. It affects your brain throughout the lifespan. So what we talk about is brain function. You throughout from the day one of your life to day bazillion, you are affected by what you're putting in your body every day. But in early life, it's beyond brain function, it's brain structure. So when we have young children that don't have enough to eat or don't have the right foods to eat, the actual architecture of their brain is different. Their brains grow differently. They're not as effective. So Children's Health Watch is a nonpartisan research and policy network, and our goal is to improve the health and development of young kids by trying to address and alleviate economic hardships. We have sort of 3 areas, in fact, that relate very much to what we just heard about. One is food, obviously, one is housing, and one is energy, and ability to afford utilities and how that affects health. It's all families under 4. We're collecting data in urban hospitals in 5 cities across the country. And we're a little bit different. We're not doing community organizing, but trying to put out scientific and policy publications that then can be used by advocates like yourself to create that science base for policy. We try to work with decision makers and policymakers to educate them about the science behind what they're doing and how they can make better policy based on what we know is good for kids and bad for kids and bad for families. So just going back to the prevalence again that we know among our kids, these very young kids under 4, 23% of them are food insecure, and it's even higher right here in Boston. We know that 29% of our Latino kids are food insecure, and 23% of our Black children, and that's compared to our white children, we have 17%. So there are big disparities there, even among a group of low-income families. There are 2 things that I wanted to highlight as far as action items today. One thing, we've heard a lot about indicators, about measuring the problem, and I absolutely agree. How can you know whether you've made a difference unless you've measured it and started it? But using 18 questions is kind of ridiculous in a practical community setting. That's not going to happen. So we tried to validate just 2 questions that track very closely to the 18-question outcomes. So there's a brief somewhere in the room, I don't know where they went now, and it's called the Hunger Vital Sign. And it's 2 questions that can be used in a community setting, in a research setting, in a clinical setting. And the idea behind calling it the Hunger Vital Sign is that we want to think of it like the way that your doctor checks your blood pressure or your pulse or your weight. And that's something that happens at every visit. Well, they should also be checking and finding out if you have enough to eat at home. And if not, then making sure that your family gets referred to resources, especially in low-income areas. So that is somewhere there. And that's something that's being used across the country. We already know of healthcare settings in Colorado, Maryland, Minnesota, and Massachusetts and Vermont that are using those. The second and last thing that I want to highlight is something actually that's being spearheaded by Massachusetts Public Health Association, and it relates very much to the work that PolicyLink has been doing. It's a healthy food financing initiative, and in fact, there's an update even from last night. It's a very timely thing. This is a bill that is providing funding to bring stores into areas that don't have enough stores, and there's a lot of, you may have heard of food deserts, areas where there's not enough food and not enough healthy, affordable food. So this would help provide the financing to bring those stores into those areas, and it was included as a provision in the environmental bond bill that passed the Senate last night. The lead proponents are Senator Michael Moore, Senator Chang Diaz, Senator Forey, and Senator Donahue, and they're all working on the funding right now. And the bill is now going to conference committee, and we need action to ensure that that language is preserved and that bill actually happens. So there's 2 ways that you can bring your voice to this fight, and that is adding your name to the petition online on Massachusetts Public Health Association's website. But you want to raise your hands just so people have more questions, they can come get you. So their website is mphaweb.org, and the petition's right there on the homepage, I checked. And you can also get postcards from MPHA and sign those for your senators and reps and make sure that they know that you support that bill as well. So with that, I will end. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to say thank y'all for having me here. It's an honor, speaking in front of y'all, and it's really, fun, working with y'all and doing what you do. So here it goes. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Hello. My name is CJ Victor, and I'm a youth organizer at Teen Empowerment. Today, I'm speaking to you about why we need year-round youth leadership jobs and police-youth collaborations in our communities. I was 14 years old when violence first impacted me, and that impact will live with me for the rest of my life. My cousin Nicholas was murdered when he was only 14 years old on Bowden Street in Dorchester, when two men tried to rob him of his brother's motor scooter. After he struggled to defend himself, one of the men grabbed him and held him down as the other shot him 2 times. This affected me greatly. Nicholas treated me like a brother, and even though he was younger than me, he always taught me to be a leader in my community. Before Nicholas died, I volunteered for my church and was really active in my community. After he was murdered, though, I felt dead inside too. I stopped volunteering and didn't feel like doing much anymore, but then I soon realized how important it was to be a leader in my community and how being a leader can be being a leader in my community, I can help prevent this from happening to someone ever again. That's why I applied for a job at Teen Empowerment. I feel as though if we had year-round youth leadership jobs, like my job at Teen Empowerment, dozens of incidents like these can be stopped from ever happening. Teen Empowerment, for example, before losing funding, actually had a site over on Bowden Street 2 years before my cousin was killed. I felt like if Teen Empowerment had more funding, his death could have been prevented. However, everything happens for a reason. I believe today is that reason. Today, I speak to you about having more leadership jobs to give youth the chance to make a difference in their community and to make their community safer. Using their talents and moving it in the positive directions, teens can have the benefits of opening up and having more opportunities. I know as a youth organizer at Teen Empowerment that we have been making a difference for the city of Boston. As a youth organizer, I'm able to deliver the messages of issues that teens face on a daily basis through my poetry and public speaking. If youth were given an opportunity to make a difference, this will allow us to break down stereotypes like all youth are bad. Teens aren't bad. Some of us just happen to make bad decisions due to the lack of opportunities. If we break down that stereotype, then we can break down more stereotypes like cops can't be trusted. A lot of youth in Boston have had negative interactions with the police. That's why at Teen Empowerment, we have planned a youth-police dialogue this year. We were able to have one-on-one conversations and build positive relationships with the police. If we have programs that involve youth and police working together, then we can break down barriers and stereotypes that separate us because youth and police make up the community as well. Under the police uniform and the outfits today worn by youth, we are all human, and that will never change. This is my message to you all today, and I hope that you will help me work to spread this message. Thank you.
Well, that's a hard act to follow, but thank you all. It's now my pleasure to introduce Marvin Martin, who will introduce our keynote speaker today. I do want to take this opportunity to say a couple of words about both Marvin and about Angela. Many of you, most of you in this room know who Marvin Martin is, but I think one of the most important things to know about him is that Marvin is the one who reminds us that equity is the civil rights movement of the 21st century. And he's been saying this for years, and he's been a true believer and advocate of that position. And it's been very helpful to all of us who do this work to know, to recognize, understand, and know that he will continue to make that statement. I'd also like to take this opportunity to say, when I spoke earlier about the words of Charles Hamilton Houston and the need for all our struggles to tie in together, that I can't think of another person or another organization in this country that embodies that notion more than Angela Glover Blackwell or PolicyLink. She has been tireless in her efforts to make those connections, but I'm going to turn it over to Marvin to introduce her more fully. Marvin.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think it just turned afternoon. Well, there's a lot of people here. I'm glad all of you could come. I want to thank MAPC, Mel King Institute for the opportunity to co-sponsor this event. Thank David and the Institute for hosting it. And I am here to introduce Angela. I do want to take this opportunity, though, just to say something about equity and some of the statements that have you've heard from people who preceded me. I think this, sorry. Need all this thing. Okay, so I think, David is right. I do say all the time that equity is the civil rights movement of the 21st century. And I do think this issue of equity and regional equity is probably the most important work that we can do now. Because if we achieve it, then we eradicate a lot of the issues that we all work on, subpar schools, poor housing conditions, inequities in the workplace. All that stuff goes away if we do this right. And someone asked once, what's the difference between equality and equity? Well, at the moment, we need equity because equality doesn't get us all to the same place right now, because if we got people up here and people down here, if we put everything in equally, then nothing changes, right? You just get up a little higher. And so to get to, I would like to have an equitable society, but get through to that, we have to really go through equity. So it's important that people are here. Mark mentioned also that planning agencies across the country are starting to look at this issue of equity, where a few years ago, they weren't. No one was. I would like to say that the equity movement is experiencing some of the same thing. And Ms. Glover Blackwell and I was sharing this thought just before we started. There seems to be an explosion of people who are interested in equity here in Boston and in Massachusetts. And, for 12 years, Action for Regional Equity, we've been talking about this. And I guess in some ways, I kind of feel like we were John the Baptist in the wilderness crying out to folks, right? And we did have ardent followers, but now everyone seems to be coming to Jesus. And there's a discussion everywhere about equity, which is great. I love it. I love it. I would just caution folks that there's a lot of work that's been done by a lot of good organizations and groups who've been thinking about this issue. You don't have to start from scratch. Reach out to some of the folks who have been involved in this issue, because it's important that we don't have to necessarily totally agree on how we move forward. But it is important that we do agree on what our understanding of equity is and the effects it have. That part is important. And if we don't come to that shared understanding, then our work is going to be all over the place. Okay. The other important thing, and Meredith, Kalila, all pointed to it, marked it in his remarks as well, is that you can't do this work in silos. It's important that the housing advocates work with the transportation advocates, who work with the good jobs advocates, the health advocates, because each issue affects each other. And if we work in silos, we may unintentionally do harm to someone else. So it's important that we have these cross-sector conversations. That's what's very important. I know that's what we've been doing in action. I see it happening more. It's important that we keep doing that. So, the report that the MAPC has put together is a good report. Mark stopped by my office to say, well, what do y'all think about it? What's Action think about it? Because he knows how critical some people in Action can be, not me. Some people in Action can be. And we told them, actually, we thought this was a really nice report. So, but it was good. Yes, it was a good report. So I guess, since I always start with the John the Baptist and Jesus analogy, I just continue down that road. As you find your religion in this, go to a book that's been around for a while, so like the Bible, the Quran. In this case, look at some of the stuff that's been done from some of the groups that are in here that's been working on this, including Policy Link. But before I get to Policy Link, because it's a perfect segue into my speaker, the MAPC report, there even some stuff from Action back there on the table. There are a number of people here from Action that I'm going to try to identify some of them. I can't see everybody here, but if you raise your hands, they call your name. Meredith, Kalila, I see Mella, I know Weezy's there, McCargy. I heard Philip was in the room. Michael's right there, Michael Stone. I think Kevin Odell's back there somewhere. These are folks, and did I miss anybody? Just raise your hand, please, because I can't see everybody here. Talk to those people. Okay, take a minute, talk to them. They'll talk to you. They're not horrible people. They'll talk to you, and they also let you know some of the stuff that we're doing, because we would invite you to be involved in some of the discussions that we're having, because we're looking for other people to join some of our discussions as we move forward with our own equity movement. So, Ms. Angela Glover Blackwell. So one of the groups, if you want to get the Bible, read the Policy Link, go to their website. They're the pioneering organization, who's been pushing this idea of regional equity. And I have a whole bio here, but I'm only going to read some of it because she has a relationship here with folks in Boston and Massachusetts that's probably more important than her bio, but let me read the bio. Angela Glover Blackwell, founder, chief executive officer, started Policy Link in 1999 and continues to drive its mission of advancing economic and social equity. Under Angela's leadership, Policy Link has become a leading voice in the movement to use public policy to improve access and opportunity for all low-income people and communities of color, particularly in the areas of health, housing, transportation, education, and infrastructure. Angela's a frequent commentator for some of the nation's top news organizations, including the New York Times, Huffington Post, Washington Post, CNN, has appeared regularly on shows such as American Public Media's Marketplace, The Tavis Smiley Show, Nightline, PBS's Now. Angela has also been a guest on the PBS series Moyers and Company and PBS NewsHour. She appears in the sixth and final segment of the PBS six-part series, The African Americans, Many Rivers Across, with Henry Louis Gates Jr., which aired in October and November 2 years ago. Angela is the co-author of Uncommon, Common Ground, Racism in America's Future, and she's contributed to a number of other works. I just want to say that she's been an inspiration to me. Met Angela when this group was first founded back in 2002. Policy Link was very instrumental in that. I think a lot of you remember Dwayne, who was here so much. I wasn't sure had he moved here or was he still living in California. He must have racked up 1 million miles flying back and forth. But I appreciate the fact that Angela lent Dwayne to us for the time that he was here. And Angela has been here a number of times. She is, one of the most inspirational speakers I've ever heard. And, to that extent, when we had our conference 2 years ago, we invited her to be the keynote speaker. And as I knew it, there was a lot of accolades, and people called me back and said how wonderful she was. By the way, we have one coming up in December. So all of you, hold the date, December 4th, 5th, and 6th, in your calendar this year, okay? We will be having our another conference. I hope to see all of you there. All of you. We got your names because there's a sign-in sheet at the door. So I expect to see you all there. So, and I just want to before I ask Angela to come up here, I would be remiss to, David mentioned at the beginning that he used to work in equity, whatever that means. David didn't raise his hand, but David Harris was also on the steering committee of Action for Regional Equity for years when he represented Fair Housing Centers. So thank you, David, for your contributions over these years. And he still works on one of our policy committees. So I don't know what he means by he doesn't do equity work anymore. I'm not sure why you're at the committee if that's not what you dare to do. But anyway, we can talk about that offline. So without further ado, I'd like to bring to you honored keynote speaker, Angela.
To make this noise. Well, good afternoon. It is absolutely my pleasure to be here. David Harris asked me to do one piece of housekeeping before I start. He forgot to tell you that there are cards on your table, which you should use to write down questions. I am delighted to be here to talk to you about your agenda. And it is so exciting to be back here because Marvin is absolutely right. We have been involved with the Boston community since very early on in our creation. And you have always inspired us because we had really big ideas about equity and regional equity and equitable development, and we thought our analysis was just superb. We were gathering data, but it wasn't until you took it up as a community, you made it real, and your making it real made it more real for us and really gave us the confidence to keep going across the country talking about these issues. So it is thrilling for me to be back here. It's also thrilling to me to see how you, as a community, have taken the issue and moved from calling it out to gathering data to really look and see what's happening, using that data to really inform policy, and then making a commitment to move from policy to action. And then we know that action will lead to change. It is absolutely wonderful to see the complete package developing in a single community. The report which MAPC has put out with all of you, really does tell the whole story. So I'm not going to spend too much of my time going into what the various policy areas are because you have identified them, and you've identified the way that you have to take a policy area and do a deep dive to look at all the elements of it and the precision that it takes to really get policy aligned with an outcome. You've got that. But I think what you and what most communities need is really reinforcement and conversation about what is equity, why equity now, how do you get the ability and the patience to stay in it for the long term, and what does it take to be able to do that? That's really where we all have to come together. Because again, Marvin is right, the time has come. PolicyLink's been around for 15 years. We've been talking about the same things for 15 years. And the past 2 years have absolutely felt like we're on speed up. Because everybody does want to talk about it, whether it's hospitals across the country wondering about how they're going to do community benefits now that we have the Affordable Care Act. Whether it's municipalities that are beginning to understand that they cannot bury their heads in the sand around these issues of inclusion and poverty and people who are being left behind. Whether it's the federal government that's really trying to step up and be a national leader and think about the future, all of these roads are leading to equity. Seems that every foundation in America has turned to us at one time or another and said, what does it mean? What should we be doing differently? How can we advance it? It is an idea whose time has come, but it's a hard idea. And it's going to be tough, and it is going to take a long time. And we're going to have to stay on it. We're going to have to stay on it through what I often think of as the groan zone. You know, you get into that moment where everything starts to feel just too hard, the groan zone. How do you stay in it through that and come out? Well, at PolicyLink, when we talk about equity, we mean something very simple: just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. That's what it is. And it's certainly true that equity is different from equality. Equality really suggests that we've done our job when we're treating everybody the same, when everybody's getting the same thing. And we know that we have been too uneven in this society for merely deciding now to treat everybody the same is going to get us where we want to go. That's most obvious in the education arena. If we say what we want is for all children to learn, graduate, and leave with the capacity to pursue higher education or meaningful careers, we know that children are starting in different places. And it's not going to be just the same school books, the same teachers, the same amount of time in school. Some children are going to need support services that are not provided in their families. So the community is going to have to step up and do that a little more. Some children perhaps need more time in school. Some perhaps need a different kind of curriculum to make up for what has not happened in the past and be ready for what has to happen in the future. Equity asks the question, where do we want people to be? And then looks into what it is we have to invest in order to get there. And as we think about it, we know that it is going to take a long time. Several people have referred to that. I want to tell you a couple of stories, one very personal and the other very personal. One is, I didn't go to law school until I was almost 29 years old. And that seems like such a baby now when I look back on it. But at the time, I remember several of my friends saying, "Are you sure you want to do that? By the time you finish law school, you'll be almost 32. You laugh, but you know, people were going to law school at 22, coming out at 25. That was older then. And I thought about that because enough people said it that I thought maybe I ought to think about it. And as I thought about it, I concluded that if I was lucky, I was going to be 32 anyway. I might as well be doing what I wanted to do when I got there. And that's how we need to be thinking about how long this is going to take. Maybe it will take a decade, but if we're lucky, we'll be around a decade from now. We might as well be further, much further along that path of equity when we get there. But the other that really has to do with how long it takes, and I've often been accused of being too patient. And I don't think I'm too patient, but I do like to succeed. And if you like to succeed, you understand that you're often in a situation of spiraling upward, but that spiral can go out very far sometimes, and it can take a long time. When I was practicing law in 1979, a group of community residents from San Francisco came in to see me in the law firm because they were losing their last grocery store. And they wanted a firm that was a very active public interest law firm to do something about it. I took it to my law partners, and of course they took it seriously, and we met and we tried to figure out what we could do, and we couldn't come up with a way to keep that grocery store in that community. The best that we could come up with was an antitrust approach, and the best that we could have gotten if we could have succeeded, which we wouldn't have, would have been treble damages. It would not have kept the grocery store in that community, and so we filed an administrative petition with then Governor Jerry Brown. That proves it was over 30 years ago, right? But he's our governor again. We filed an administrative petition with then Governor Jerry Brown, and he took it seriously. He set up a statewide commission. There were hearings all over the state. Many things happened. We started buying clubs. They started the first fund focused on farmers markets. Got a lot of things in place, but not one grocery store. Not one new grocery store came out of it. 20 years later, when I started PolicyLink, I recognized that there had been a lot of movement on this issue across the country and asked somebody to take a look. And we did a report. One of the things we found was the Pennsylvania Fresh Food Financing Initiative that had taken seriously this issue, put $30 million into the economic stimulus package. It has now been able to leverage over $190 million. 5,000 people now have jobs that didn't have them. 450,000 people now have neighborhood access to fresh fruits and vegetables, and there are over 86 different projects, many of which are grocery stores in underserved communities. That was a long time. Then the Obama administration came in, 2009. We were taking new ideas, and we joined with the Food Trust and the Reinvestment Fund to say, look at what Pennsylvania has done. We need to do something like that at the federal level, and there was born the Healthy Food Financing Initiative. We are talking about a 30-year gap. Perhaps that's too much patience, but along the way, things had been happening. Communities were lifting this up. They were solving the problem. PolicyLink actually works on the notion that you show me a problem, and I can show you a community someplace that has solved it. Someplace that has solved it. What we need to do is start shining a bright light on those strategies, lifting them up, understanding how to take that good work, translate it into policy, and spread it to all the people who need it. We have to stick with it, but we have to know we are never, ever starting with a blank slate. And so when we think about these issues of equity, what we have to know is that all the things that you have been doing and the people like you have been doing across the country are now the stuff of the present and the stuff of the future. I like that Marvin says that equity is the civil rights agenda for the 21st century, but I think it's bigger than that. Someone was interviewing me just last week about public education and asked me if I thought that education was a civil right. And I stopped and I said, well, of course it is. Of course it is, but it's way more than that. It's a civil right because at the time when we really started focusing on it as a civil rights, we were talking about people who were thought of as minorities. And democracy, if it exists for any purpose, exists to make sure that it looks out for minorities. That's what makes democracy strong. And being able to identify the rights of all is an important element of that. And so, of course, education is a civil rights because we had to raise it up as a civil rights in order to go forward. But it's different today. We live in a nation in which since summer of 2012, the majority of all babies born in this country have been babies of color. That by the end of this decade, and I don't know about you, but for me, it feels like we are running through this decade like a hot knife through melted butter, right? By the end of this decade, the majority of all children in this country will be children of color. And as we think about who's being left behind, we know the groups that are driving this demographic shift are overrepresented among those who are being left behind. And so education and jobs and health and well-being and any measure of well-being that you think about, when this country looks at itself against other countries in the world, what happens to people of color will determine the standing of the United States of America. The fate of people of color is directly tied to the fate of the nation. The fate of the nation is dependent on what happens to people of color. And as we have used this language of disparities and gaps between black and white and Latino and white, we fail to frame the issue as it needs to be framed. Because the challenge is not the difference between black and white. The challenge is the difference between all of us and where we all need to be. That the measure of how we're doing is the measure of how we need to be doing in order for the nation to thrive. This notion of equity has taken on new urgency. That we don't get America right if we don't get equity right. Equity is the superior growth model for the future. That as we think about transportation and how we as a nation begin to invest more in public transportation, we really know the people who are most likely to use it are people of color. That as a nation, we won't get comfortable with the investment in public transportation if we're not comfortable sitting next to the other. That all of those challenges that we have had as a nation are front and center when we think about the going forward. Housing is absolutely key. We live in a country in which where you live is a proxy for opportunity. You tell me your address, and I can tell you way too much personal stuff about you. I will know whether or not you have any value you can pull out of your home in case of an emergency if you happen to own one. I can tell you whether or not your children are likely to go to a good school. I can tell you whether or not job opportunities are close in, or whether you have access to jobs throughout the region, whether or not the public transportation system gets you there. I can even tell you how long you'll live and how well you live while you live. You know that the life expectancy in affluent areas is often 15 years longer than the life expectancy in some of our poorest communities. This notion of housing is so related to absolutely everything. And so when we think about equity, whether it's equity in education, whether it's equity in employment, whether it's equity in housing, all of those issues are going to have a profound impact on how we live collectively in our cities, in our regions, in our states, and in our nation. And so we have to figure out how to talk about this with people who are uncomfortable with the inclusion discussion. And we have to put that on speed up, because we don't have a lot of time. We need to take the time that it's going to take, but we have to shorten it by not being stopped by the absence of public will. It takes a long time to transform things, and we're going to have to do a lot of transforming, but we can't double and triple and quadruple that time because of the absence of public will. And getting people to bring the public will to it requires just what you're doing, translating a desire to have a fully inclusive society into policy, building the partnerships, Action for Regional Equity, the Mel King Institute, MAPC, and every other organization in this room. We have to have all of those groups, which I suspect are the usual suspects, and we have to have the unusual suspects. We have to vastly expand our partnerships. We have to be able to join with people across the country so that we never feel that in our little world that we're the be-all and end-all. I was just in New Orleans, where you would be so proud of the way, under the leadership of Mitch Landrieu, that community is taking up the challenge of equity, talking about it at the highest levels, drilling down within the agencies on policy, determined that their measure is not just going to be how are we doing in general, but measuring it from the most vulnerable. New York City is doing exactly the same thing. So is the Bay Area. So is Minneapolis. We need to be part of those networks so that we can learn quickly, so that people can see they're a part of something national, so they can understand how big it actually is. I just want to end by talking about, as you are talking to people about equity, how important it is for people to understand that paying attention to those who are being left behind is not a side business. It is the business, and it is the thing that benefits everyone. Some of you have heard me speak before, have heard me use this example, but it just always drives it home for me. Those cutouts in the sidewalk that we all experience, they are there because of the advocacy of people with disabilities. People with disabilities who were able to win the right, had the right to access, had the right to jobs, but that right was not made real if people with wheelchairs could not maneuver around the community. So through the advocacy of people with disabilities, we got those cutouts in the sidewalk. How many of you have been pushing a baby stroller and been so happy you didn't have to pick that contraption up from one sidewalk to another? How many of you, like me, have been running to catch a train, dragging that suitcase behind you, and you made it because you didn't have to pick that contraption up? How many times have you been or observed workers who made their work easier because they didn't have to push or pull that cart over those the sidewalks, but it would go easily? How many of you who've been parents or grandparents and had a new bike rider had your mind a little more at ease because that new rider was riding around, going sidewalk to sidewalk rather than in the street? That is an example of when we solve the problems for those who are most vulnerable, we solve them for everyone. Always remember that. And remember that story and other stories as you are talking to your neighbors, as you are bringing in the unusual suspects. We will achieve regional equity, but we need to do it now. We need to do it fast. We know the way to get there. We know exactly that the way to get there is through equity. And that by going through equity, we don't slow the process down, we speed it up. We don't divert ourselves to focus on marginal groups. By focusing on those who are most likely to be left behind, we focus on everybody. Thank you for your work.
Well, thank you so very much. Again, it's hard to follow. So one thing I will say, do people have questions on those cards? Okay, so I think what I'd like to have us do is continue our conversation over lunch, but I do want to take advantage of the opportunity to clarify a couple of things for the record. And it happens to me when I astray from my written script. When I said I don't do equity anymore, what I had written down was that we at the Institute don't articulate our work in the language of equity. I speak in the language of what I call community justice. For me, community justice is a form of equity, but community justice has to do with recognizing that there are people in our communities who historically have not been heard, whose voices are not at the policy table. And it is our responsibility, obligation, and opportunity to do what we can to ensure that those voices are heard, recognized, and amplified in the policy realm. And that it's only the work that we do might have to do with what some people think of as criminal justice reform, public safety, whatever. But when I said all of our struggles tie together, I mean that there is no public safety, there is no community justice. Equity is public safety. Equity is public justice, is community justice. So I think I just want to clarify for the record that aside from the fact that most of my day is spent in administrative tasks, we at the Institute are very much engaged in the struggle for equity. The other thing I'd like to say, I'd like to encourage Marvin. I want to echo what Marvin said. I think it's important for us all to get involved in the various coalitions that exist. I would also urge you to sign up for the Policy Link, to go to the Policy Link and sign up for its newsletters and advisories. And I'll say that I just read something by Angela the other day, in which she addressed this question. It's interesting, it follows directly on what she's talking about the criticisms for My Brother's Keeper. Some of you might have seen that there's a debate, a kind of conversation going on about whether or not the notion of My Brother's Keeper and addressing the needs, and creating programs and policies that address the needs of young boys and men of color ignores or leaves out too many people, including young women of color and women of color. And I'm not going to kind of give the punchline, but I encourage you to go to PolicyLink, look at Angela's comments on that and the comments of John Powell and others, and you'll see right there exactly what she's talking about. So I'm going to tell you now that if we don't have no cards, no questions, we do have lunch, and we encourage you to look on your table to continue the conversation among yourselves at lunch. There are some possible questions on the table that you can use. Some of you might be sitting with people you know, and you can just deepen those relationships. Some of you might be sitting with people you don't know, and you can create those relationships. But I encourage you, we have bag lunches in the back. I want to give another round of applause to everybody who's been part of this day today. And I want to repeat my thanks to all of you for coming and being part of this important event. Thank you.